17. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me,
Come hither. I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication.
So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said unto me,
Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman, and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was, and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords, and King of kings, and they that are with him are called, and chosen, and faithful.
And he saith unto me,
The waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples, and multitudes, and nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth.
NATO troops deployed to Canada to protect Canada from America? This future isn't as far-fetched as it sounds, and it's all being made possible by the new United States of America. In 2025, the United States executed the biggest foreign policy shift in its history. After nearly a century as a founding member of NATO, the nation that once led the world's most powerful military alliance is now actively working against its own allies, and even threatening military action against 2 of them. No, this isn't some fantasy cooked up by Vladimir Putin, the man who has spent decades trying to undermine NATO from within, but somehow reality is aligning perfectly with Putin's ultimate goal, the end of American cooperation in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And now, with NATO weakened, there are clear signs that Russia is watching closely, ready to exploit the chaos. How did we get here? How would NATO without the US function? And what does the future hold? NATO wasn't just the United States' idea, it was the cornerstone of a US-led global order that has been heralded as the Pax Americana. After centuries of constant warfare between major states, the NATO alliance didn't just bring old enemies together, it acted as a global bulwark against further major power wars. The age of imperialism was officially over. At its inception, NATO had 3 chief goals: keep the US in, keep Germany down, and keep the Soviets out. Having the US remain in the alliance was critical for its success. America was the burgeoning global superpower, and its separation from European politics gave it a neutrality of sorts for others to rally around. Keeping Germany down was all about not repeating the disastrous wars of its past. And lastly, keeping the Soviet Union out of Europe was key for regional stability and peace. The deal was good for Europe, and it was even better for the United States. Being the de facto head of the NATO alliance gave the US massive global influence. It also made it an example for other nations around the world to look to for guidance and leadership. This helped the US spread partnerships across the Middle East and Asia, bringing the world closer together and reducing the risk of a disastrous Third World War. It also massively boosted American influence, opening doors for US businesses and economic interests around the world. NATO was far from a charity case for the US. The Europeans got security, but the US got much more out of the deal. This is why the current split between the US and its European partners is all the more bewildering. In just 2 months, America has thrown away much of what it accomplished since the end of the Second World War, weakening not just itself but the world at large. A focus on America's new golden age ignores the very real decline of US prestige and influence across the globe. Perhaps the best summary comes from Iran's supreme leader, who recently reposted a 2022 tweet warning that America's treatment of Ukraine should serve as a reminder to all that Western support for countries and governments is a mirage. The US is yet to reap all that it's sown, but for the rest of NATO, the consequences are immediate and dire. First, the nation faces a Russian state that is fully mobilized for war. There's much being said about Russia's inability to win in Ukraine, but that's chiefly because of the bulk of military hardware and ammunition being used by Ukraine is supplied by the United States. In exchange, the US redirected funds originally allocated for Ukraine aid to purchase newer, more advanced weaponry for itself, using battlefield data to refine future designs and military tactics. As of March 4, 2025, all aid is officially suspended indefinitely. The loss of American aid is expected to cost the Ukrainians dearly, starting in the next 3 to 6 months when their stockpiles of American supplies run low. With Europe still struggling to mobilize its own defense industry and divided by partisan politics, Ukraine is unlikely to receive enough support to plug the hole caused by the termination of American aid. But that's only part of the picture, because a major component of US aid to Ukraine was of the silent variety that doesn't make the news, and it is just as critical. This is intelligence support, which has recently been paused. The support is absolutely critical for Ukraine's defense, and it's extremely unlikely that Europe could fill the role. This intelligence support comes largely from America's extensive network of informants and spies inside of Russia, as well as its vast intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance or ISR assets. These include everything from spy drones and AWACS aircraft monitoring Russian movements over the Black Sea, to satellites tracking troop deployments and identifying targets of opportunity. Since the war began, the CIA, NRO, and US military intelligence have worked closely in coordination with Ukraine, with unacknowledged US personnel reportedly on the ground. Along the Russian-Ukrainian and Belarusian-Ukrainian borders, secret Ukrainian intelligence bases dug underground for concealment have been equipped and funded by the CIA. This too isn't charity work though, because in return Ukraine has provided critical intelligence on Russian weapon systems. As a means of showing their loyalty and trustworthiness, Ukrainian intelligence handed over design documents for Russia's newest nuclear submarines at the start of the war. Ukraine has also handed over captured Russian equipment, such as state-of-the-art electronic warfare vehicles, abandoned by Russian troops and captured intact. If the US steps out of this role, Europe isn't prepared or even capable of fully fulfilling it. NATO air warning and alert patrol missions may be flying AWACS staffed with multinational crews, but the aircraft is more often than not American. Europe also doesn't have the satellite and recon capabilities of the US, relying on intelligence sharing agreements for decades. In light of this, a US pullout would mean that Russian forces would not face nearly as many setbacks and vulnerabilities as they had while the US was still nominally in the fight. Russia may not be able to completely militarily defeat Ukraine, but it doesn't have to. A peace deal that allows Russia to retain captured territories would give it valuable time to rest, rearm, and rebuild its combat power. More importantly, it would provide the perfect staging ground for a future offensive. not just into Ukraine, but potentially beyond. And to Europe's horror, the US seems set to negotiate exactly this peace deal behind Europe's back. And in an unprecedented move, the US voted in opposition to its allies by refusing to condemn Russia for invading Ukraine in a UN vote. Furthermore, the White House has surrendered all leverage before even entering negotiations with Putin over Ukraine. It's been publicly stated that no US troops would participate in peacekeeping efforts and that the US would no longer guarantee European security. This leaves sanctions as the only remaining tool to pressure Russia, but even that may not last. There are rumors already circulating that the American president may have begun the process of removing or easing sanctions on Moscow. All of this has been portrayed as a show of good faith to get Russia to the negotiation table. But Russia has made no similar good faith concessions. Whatever the reasoning for Washington giving Russia everything it wants with nothing in return, the message to NATO is clear. The US is no longer a reliable partner. Then it comes to the trade wars and military threats against its allies. On March 4, 2025, the US imposed 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada with a promise that tariffs against the EU are to follow soon. Retaliatory tariffs are set to drive up inflation significantly in the US and directly impact hundreds of thousands of jobs who rely on overseas trade. More disturbing, though, are the flat-out refusals by the White House to walk back statements that it was considering military action against Greenland and Panama after openly expressing desires for both to become American territories. This is especially alarming, given that Greenland is administered by Denmark, one of America's longest-standing allies and a founding member of NATO. If the U.S. were to pursue military action, it would mean sending American troops into combat against a treaty ally, directly undermining NATO itself. And technically, by the terms of the NATO treaty, trigger an Article 5 response against the United States. Once more, we have to remind you that this isn't Vladimir Putin's fantasy, it's our present reality. So, what can NATO do in a future without the US as a reliable ally, and even worse, with the US as a threat? First, steps are already being taken to make Europe security independent from the United States. It's true that Europe has freeloaded a lot of its security off of US taxpayers, but this would also be ignoring the reality that American politicians themselves have purposefully manipulated Europe into being security dependent on the US. The US has historically supported European leaders who didn't push for full military independence, ensuring that America remained the primary guarantor of European security. This arrangement not only reinforced US global prestige, but also provided significant economic and soft power advantages. Simply put, it's been a very good deal for the US until now. Germany and France have announced a need for Europe to distance itself from the new America, and along with many European countries, they're already looking to do that by divesting themselves of US defense contractors. At the moment, the US is the world's largest arms dealer, with American weapons being a cornerstone of NATO arsenals. This makes it extremely interoperable, adding to its lethality. NATO's fleet of F-35s is designed to seamlessly communicate with one another. Additionally, a shared familiarity with various weapon systems, training protocols, and logistics ensures that NATO armies can work together more effectively on the battlefield. But this also makes Europe extremely vulnerable against an increasingly hostile America. A big fear in every European military planner's mind is what will happen if the White House decides to cut off software upgrades for the F-35, for example. America can't simply take the weapons it has sold back, at least probably not without having to face those same weapons in combat, but what it can do is turn off logistical support entirely. No more updates, no more repairs, making a very expensive weapon system practically useless for European nations. This is why Europe has been driving ever harder to establish next-generation weapons programs independently of the US. Currently, there are two major sixth-generation fighter programs running inside of Europe. The first is a joint venture between France, Germany, and Spain, known as the Future Combat Air System. The other is a program between UK, Italy, and Japan, known as the Global Combat Air System, or GCAP. The American defense industry is a global leader, but that is a position only made possible by their access to huge overseas markets. Without hundreds of billions in defense contracts from allied militaries, the U.S. defense industry would face severe downsizing. A lack of foreign sales would lead to reduced production capacity, fewer technological advancements, and shrinking research budgets. Over time, this decline could make the American defense sector less competitive, eventually allowing global rivals to surpass the U.S. military technology and manufacturing dominance. This is not a good start to an American golden age. Europe can also strike back at American weapons programs by withholding components or participation in manufacturing. The F-35 is famously an American aircraft, but an international project. The UK and Italy, for example, provide critical components and assist in manufacturing. The Netherlands provides parts for the fuselage, and Norway and Australia who build engine components. The jet simply cannot be built without America's global partners. With the F-35 increasingly making up America's air fleets, the U.S. might find itself in a future where it's unable to fly its own planes due to a lack of repair capabilities and replacement production. The biggest blow to the United States, though, is also a step that's already under consideration by European powers: removing U.S. access to their military bases. As the United States increasingly aligns itself, countries across Europe are becoming increasingly fearful of what it might mean if the next war involves the United States on Russia's side. It's not as crazy a scenario as it appears on the face of it. The new White House has already expressed ambitions of seizing territory held by allies. With the U.S. shifting toward a purely transactional geopolitical model, there's every reason to worry that American troops could be used to seize key strategic hubs inside of Europe, forcing allied nations into unfavorable concessions. Germany hosts nearly 35,000 American soldiers, along with one of the U.S.'s largest air bases anywhere outside of its own borders. From this position, the U.S. could rapidly project land and air power all across Germany, effectively neutralizing the German military's ability to defend its own territory while holding key strategic locations hostage. It's a genuine fear expressed by many Europeans today. This means that increasingly, Europeans are eyeing U.S. presence on their soil warily, conscious of how even a small toehold could be exploited by the U.S.'s vast expeditionary capabilities. We could very well soon see the end of a U.S. presence in Europe, and this would be disastrous for the United States as well. Europe serves as the gateway for the U.S. military into the Middle East and Africa, allowing the U.S. to support far-flung military campaigns all the way into Iraq and Afghanistan. It was the European-American military bases that were the key nodes in the logistical chain linking U.S. troops back home to the mainland. Losing Europe would be America's largest geopolitical disaster in its history, compounding a growing list of foreign policy setbacks and disasters. Europe is now scrambling to redefine NATO without the United States, unsure of what the alliance looks like or how it functions without its longtime leader. Meanwhile, the U.S. is blindly walking into a self-made disaster, a future where it has no allies, no global reach, no reliable partners, and zero trust left in its promises or guarantees. Is NATO strong enough to survive without U.S. support, or is this the beginning of the end for the alliance? How will Europe respond to this massive shift in global power? Drop your thoughts below.
All right, I'd like to start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Ba'Hashem Yahushai, Ba'Hashem Rachah Kodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is Revelation chapter 17. I'm going to try to get through this as quick as I can. So we're just going to get right into it. This is dealing with Revelation, the 17th chapter. You know, this is a chapter that was rolling around in my head, you know, this morning when I got up. And, you know, it is a very important chapter to know, to be able to understand what's going on in the world today. And it ties in a lot of end time prophecies. And there's one major thing in here to take away, and it's this woman that we're going to read about, you know. And this woman, which is compared to a whore, a harlot, is a representation of a particular country, you know, in this world. Even though it calls it a city, when you know, years ago, I remember Apostle Tar went into it. You know, what makes up a city? You know, it's citizens. You know, and pretty much, if you were born in the so-called United States, or if you naturalized, or, you know, if you get your citizenship, you become a citizen of the U.S. No matter what state you were born in, you know, you become a U.S. citizen. And citizen goes back to the word city. So America is nothing but a gigantic city, you know, that is called a country today. So we're going to get into it. Revelation 17:1. There came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials and talked with me. This is talking about the very end, going into the destruction. And when you read Revelation, pretty much Revelation is the same story told in many different allegories. You know, many different parables, you could say, proverbs. And in some of the scriptures in Revelation, it breaks down what it means. But at the time when it was written, it was not understood because this particular prophecy hadn't been fulfilled yet. So it says, saying unto me, come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment. And this is what we're heading for, the judgment. Then it says, of the great whore. She's not just a whore, she's a great whore, which means she's a master, of whoredoms, which we're going to read about. It says, I will show thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. Now, the first thing to deal with in this chapter, or this verse, is the many waters. When you jump down to the 15th verse, it says, and he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Because America has had a great influence on the world population. Everybody at one time or another was taken by the allure of America. So these waters are a representation of peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues. Now, when we deal with the part about the great whore, let's go from there. Let's go to the book of Nahum. Nahum chapter 3. And let's read 1, and we're going to jump around. Nahum chapter 3 and 1, it says, woe to the bloody city. It is full of lies and robbery. The prey departed not. Now, this is speaking about ancient Nineveh, but it could be applied to America today because it is following along the same lines as ancient Nineveh did. And a lot of those names of these different empires in the past and different great cities are applied to America today, such as Egypt, Sodom, so on and so forth. So I'm just going to jump to the point, verse 4. Because of the multitudes of the whoredoms of the well-favored harlot. You gotta, you have a, I forget what they call it. You have a stable. There you go. You have a stable, which the pimps use that as a stable for, for their hoes. The hoes being in comparison to these horses. But then out of the whole stable, you have one particular hoe that's, sought for more than any of the other ones. Could be for her beauty, could be for her body, could be for her skills. Well, America is that well-favored harlot today. Back then it was Nineveh. Then it says the mistress of witchcraft. Now the word mistress is the feminine way of saying master. So the mistress of witchcrafts, that selleth nations through her whoredoms and families through her witchcrafts. And that's what they have done. You can read about that in Revelation, the 11th chapter. You can read about that in Revelation, the 18th chapter, about slaves and souls of men. In Revelation, the 11th chapter, it speaks about, them sending gifts one to another. All right, and the last precept I have on that is the book of Jeremiah 51. And 13, right to the point. O thou that dwellest upon many waters. Now this is dealing with America also, Babylon the Great. Babylon judged for sins against Israel. And remember, this whole thing is happening to these nations for the controversy of Zion. So jumping back down to the 13th verse. O that dwellest upon many waters. So what are the waters? Peoples and nations and multitudes and tongues. America is known as what? The great melting pot. You could look into that. You could type in the Great Melting Pot America, and and you could get information dealing with that, how many nations came to this country, and really how many nations are still enamored by this great whore. Oh, that because she has a spell on everybody. O thou that dwellest upon many waters, abundant in treasures, that thine end is come, and the measure of thy covetousness. So everything that you've done that has led to your riches, now you're left there to face the music. America has to face the music. Esau has to face the music. That's a title for a lesson right there. So now let's go back to Revelation 17. And let's jump to the second verse. It says, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication. Fornication is spiritual adultery, in the case of the worship of idols. So how did they commit fornication? By taking on the philosophies, the ideologies of America. And you can see it. All you have to do is go to these different countries and you'll see how they're conformed to the image and the ways of America. It says, and the inhabitants of the earth, because when you read Revelation, the 13th chapter, it speaks about how this beast is going to have sway, over the whole earth once their deadly wound was healed. And those of you brothers that have been studying and that understand the scriptures, you know that wound was healed during the time of the Renaissance period. This is when this whole system started to emerge once again. And then once they colonized America, that became the total revival of the ancient Roman Empire, with America being the eighth head, as we're going to read later on. It says, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication, because this stuff that she's doing, she's pushing upon all different nations. Now, going back to Jeremiah 51:7, it says, Babylon has been a golden cup in the Lord's hand. So you see how Revelation 17, Revelation 18, and other chapters parallel go back with Jeremiah 50 and Jeremiah 51, because it's speaking about the same exact things. Babylon has been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. Yeah. And because all these nations have been made drunk by these philosophies, their Christianity, their democracy, Now, not every nation gives heed to Christianity, but the democracy part, all nations are pretty much on board with that. And this is why America has military bases all over the world. And this is why the nations are mimicking everything that you see in America. All right. It says the nations have drunk enough. The nations have drunk enough of wine. Therefore, the nations are mad because they're bugged out, just like America. They're in a delusional state. They're inebriated, and when they get up from that inebriation, they're gonna have a massive hangover, a massive headache. And they're going to be totally pissed off that they were taken by this whore. But the Most High gave this whore that allure. Remember, this is the baddest bitch in the stable. So she got the highest stilettos. She got the most expensive attire on, the most expensive perfumes, the most expensive jewelry. Her hair costs the most. It takes a long time to have it done, and she is desired even to this day. Even though a lot of nations hate her, she is still desired for her plenteousness, for her riches. All right, now let's go from there back to Revelation 17. Now let's go to the 3rd verse, because it says, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. They've been drunk off this Babylon juice. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast. Now, what is the scarlet-colored beast? The scarlet-colored beast is that beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. This doesn't represent America. The beast with 7 heads and 10 horns is separate from America, but America is a part of it through the 7 heads, and we'll explain that later. So the scarlet-colored beast, let's go from there to the book of Revelation 12. And 3, it says, and there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon. In one place it calls it red, another place it calls it scarlet colored beast. Then it says here, what? Great red dragon, Babylon the Great, that great city. So there are a lot of things, that are attached to these different scenarios in the scriptures that tie each other together. It's the spirit that has to guide you to be able to see it. So it says, and there appeared another wonder in heaven, behold, a great red dragon. The reason why it's red, because they are the Edomites. Edom, the name Edom goes back to the Hebrew word Adawam, which means red. So it's a great red dragon because it's a conglomeration of empires and nations. So it's very great. And it's a dragon because a dragon is known for its fierceness and for its keenness. See? It says having 7 heads and 10 horns. Now the 7 heads are the Greeks, the Romans, the Spanish, the French, Germania Major, Germania Minor, and Britain. I believe that's all 7. The Greeks, the Spanish, the French, the Romans, Germania Major, Germania Minor, and the British, yeah. And then the 10 horns represent the EU. You know, their original 10 members, even though it was 12, it's really 10 because Ireland and the UK are 1, and Portugal and Spain are 1. They just broke it up into 2. All right? So it says having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads, because the 7 crowns is a representation of, it's empirical representation, you know, of empires, you know, that ruled. All right? Now, let's go back. Matter of fact, I'm sorry, before we go back, let's go to Revelation 13:1. And I stood upon the stand of the sea. This is the Apostle John on the island of Patmos, which is in the Mediterranean Sea, you know, and, you know, the other surrounding seas there, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea. So he actually saw this rising up out of the sea. He actually saw a beast coming out of the sea having 7 heads and 10 horns. But this beast having 7 heads and 10 horns is a representation of kingdoms that would rule, and inferior kingdoms that would rule jointly with them. Okay? And this is what he saw, and this is what it represented. And when we read the rest of Revelation 17, it breaks it down upon who these 7 heads and 10 horns are. And upon the horns 10 crowns, because these 10 crowns are a representation that these 10 heads or horns would be in power. And we've seen these 10 horns in power since 1958, which is a representation of the European Union. Back then it was known as the EEC or ECC, the European EEC, European Economic Community. And upon his heads the names of blasphemy, because America had, and the Edomite Empire, when they came out from the caves, not the caves, they came out of that prison sentence, that dark cloud, they started to deceive the whole world, making the world believe that they're the Most High, that they're Yahweh Shai, that they're the angels, that they're the people of the Lord. And they've deceived the whole world. You know, so that's a part of the names of blasphemy. Okay? So now let's go back to Revelation 17. And let's go to, back again, it says, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color. Now the purple and scarlet color is a representation of her costliness. You know, matter of fact, before we read on, let's go to Revelation 18. I want to find a precept first in here. All right, Revelation 18:19, and then we're going to jump back up. It says, and they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, alas, alas, that great city. See? Great city. Babylon the Great. Great red dragon. This great city that ruleth over the kings of the earth, wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea by reason of her costliness. For in 1 hour she made desolate. So her costliness is what this is a representation of, the scarlet and the purple and scarlet color. So going back, now we jump back up to the 12th verse. I'll start at 11. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore. And this is how these nations are getting rich. And this is why they don't mind selling out. They don't mind sipping up that cup, because of the benefits that come with it. But it also comes with judgments. It says the merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones and of pearls and of fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and all the iron wood and all manner of vessels of ivory and all manner of vessels of most precious wood and of brass and iron and marble. So that is a representation of her splendor. Revelation 17:4, and the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. So we just read about that. Having a golden cup in her hand, which is that cup, the Babylonian juice that all nations are drinking, including 2/3 of Israel here in America, and even Israelites that know that they're Israelites, full of abominations and filthiness of a fornication. And what are these abominations and filthiness of a fornication? That's dealing with pretty much do what you want to do. You want to be a homo, you want to be a lesbian, you want to be a pedophile, a zoophile, you want to be a freak, you know, you want to be a transvestite, you want to be an alphabet person, you could do whatever you want here in America. Because this is spiritually Sodom in Egypt. It says, and upon her forehead was a name written, mystery. So this is a mystery as to what this is. It says Babylon the Great, because it's the greatest, because Babylon represents confusion. So America is the greatest conglomeration of confusion on the planet. Everything is turned upside down here. Woe to him that call evil good and good evil. The mother of harlots, because you can do whatever you want here. You can worship whoever you want. You know, a harlot is also symbolic of what? The Lord told Israel, I know that thou hadst a whore's forehead, because they will bow down to every different idol. So here in America, you could be whatever you want to be. You want to be a Buddhist. You want to worship trees. You want to worship lizards. You want to worship whatever you want to worship. You could do it here. So it's the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. You know, all you have to do is look to the alphabet people to understand that. And when you break Babylon the Great, mother of harlots, and abominations of the earth down, in the Hebrew, they each break down to 666. I did a video on it years ago. I'm not sure if I re-uploaded it back on here, but if you type in, I'm pretty sure if you type in Revelation 17 and 5, it may come up. If I remember, I'll check and maybe upload that video here. It's 2 parts. You know, Lord's will, I could upload it, and you know, those of you that are not familiar with it can watch it and get some understanding on it. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints. So who's the woman? America. How was she drunken with the blood of the saints? Look what she did to Gad. Look what she did to Reuben. Look what she did to Issachar, Ephraim, the other tribes. And look what she did to Judah, Benjamin, and Levi when she brought them over to this side of the world. Because these are the saints of the Lord. You know, and this is what she did. She was drunken with the blood. So much so that she wiped out a good portion, but the Lord left a remnant. It says, and with the blood of the martyrs of Yahushua, because you've had prophets that have died here in America, you know, at the behest, even though indirectly, some Jakes killed some of the martyrs, so some of the witnesses. It was based off of the freedom of the mother of harlots that she gave these Jakes to worship whatever they wanted to. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. Yeah, because she was alluring. And this is why the angel cursed out John for this. She was very alluring, and America is very alluring to the world. That's why they call it the Golden City, you know. And the benefits, you know, to them is the most important thing. It says, and the angel said unto me, wherefore didst thou marvel? So why were you marveling? Why was you all in awe? Why was your jaw dropping looking at this woman? I will tell thee the mystery, because it's a mystery of the woman. So this is not an actual woman, but it's an allegory of a particular country. And this country happens to be America, Babylon the Great. And of the beast that carrieth her, because the carrying of it was what? That these European nations are carrying America on their backs. And they're going to get tired of carrying America on their backs and turn against her. Which have 7 heads and 10 horns. And the 7 heads and 10 horns, we broke that down what that means. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. So who is that? That's America. She's the beast that you saw and is not, because she was in the vision when John saw it, but it wasn't time for America to be brought out at the time and go into perdition, because America is slated for destruction. And this is why this place was created, to show the world how to become wicked, and then to judge this place, to show you the penalty for being wicked. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. So the ones that are not a part of the elect are going to get caught up in this. You know, they're going to get caught up in that allure. You know, in that tantalizing web of lies that sounds so sweet. But then once you get entangled in it and can't get out, then you realize you're fucked. Excuse my Swedish. When they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is, which is America. Because once America came into play on the earth, that began the end of the end. So it says, and here's the mind which has wisdom. So now the Lord is using an angel to break it down to John what this means. But even back then, John didn't understand. The 7 heads are 7 mountains. Now, a mountain is a representation of government. So these 7 heads are a representation of 7 mountains, or 7 major governments among the European nations. And this is why it calls it the Scarlet Whore, or the Great Red Dragon, on which the woman sitteth, and they're carrying America. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, the 5 that were fallen, because remember, when this was given, you had these 7 heads that were there, or some of them were there, but they were there in their ancient names. So the 5 that were fallen were the Greeks, the Spanish, the French, Germanian Major, and Germanian Minor. Those are the 5 that fell, and one is, because at the time when John had the vision, it was who? The Roman Empire that was ruling. And the other is not yet come. When the other one that's not yet come is the British Empire. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And they did. Because from there, that's where America catapulted from them. And this is why they were able to so-called break away, so-called physically, but behind the scenes, England is still running things behind the scenes. It says, and the beast that was and is not, which is America, even he is the 8th. And is of the 7, because America was the 8th head that came from among the 7. Now, let's go real quick to the book of Daniel 7, because I got to get ready to close out. Daniel 7. It's Daniel 7 and 7. Right? Let me see where we at. Yep, Daniel 7 and 7. As a matter of fact, I'm going to just go straight to the point. 8. I considered the 10 horns, and behold, because this 4th beast is dealing with the Roman Empire. I considered the 10 horns, which we already broke that down, the European Union, and behold, they came up among them, what? Another little horn. So who was that other little horn? That was America that came out of that European Union. Now, this is dealing with the 10 horns, but when we read in Revelation 17, it spoke about the 7 heads and the 8th head coming out of them. This is the same thing, but just in a different analogy. So among them, and there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked by the roots. And those 3 horns that were plucked by the roots were the French, the Spanish, and the British, who were the ones that had colonized, for the most part, that colonized this part of the world. And America took them out of here. You had the Spanish-American War, you had the French-American War, and then you had the War of Independence. All right? So these were the 3. And behold, in his horns were the eyes like the eyes of man, because that represents wisdom. The scriptures say that the wisdom of these devils has corrupted them. They're wiser than Daniel. And a mouth speaking great things. And that mouth speaking great things goes back to Revelation 13 and 1. Goes back to Revelation 17 about the mouth speaking great things and blasphemy. All right. Now going back to Revelation 17:11, and the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. So the moment that America came into power is the moment that she started dying. It says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which is letting you know that it was 10 empires that were going to raise up, that were going to be ruled by these 10 kings. And a king doesn't necessarily represent an actual king. It represents a leader, because all of these different nations have leaders over them, whatever their title may be. But they're known as the kings or nobles, in the scriptures. It says, which have received no kingdom as yet, but received power as kings 1 hour with the beast. And that was a representation of when they came into power. 1 hour with the beast, 1 hour with the Most High is roughly about 42 years. A little less than 42 years. And that time was up in 1998, which was I think that was a 42nd, the 42nd year. No, actually in the year 2000 was the 42nd year, because it actually was set up in 58. So 2000 was the 42nd year, So they're living on borrowed times now. It says, these have one mind, because they are pushing this new world order, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast, because eventually they're going to all come together as one. They're going to put their differences aside, and they're going to focus on the main problem. which is America. All right. So it says, these shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. All right. So they're going to try to make war with Yahushua, but to no avail. You could go to Revelation 12. You can go to Revelation 19. You could go to 2 Ezra 13. But in the interest of time, I'm going to go to Revelation 16 and 14. Just read the point. For they are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth unto the kings of the earth and of the whole world to gather them to battle, to gather them to the battle of that great day of the power Almighty. And verse 16, and he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon, or Harmageddon, mountain of the troops. And this is why you see the armies amassing over there to fight what Esau called World War III. But the Lord calls it the War of Armageddon, the final war to end all wars. So it says, Revelation 17 and 14, these shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. And he saith unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes of nations and tongues, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore. Why? Because when you go back to Daniel 7, it says that her look was more stout than her fellows, whose look was more stout than his fellows, because they puff at these nations, even at their own allies. But the allies are going to turn against this hoe, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire, because they're going to shoot their missiles at America. So it's not just going to be Russia and China and different other nations that are allies with Russia and China that's going to shoot their missiles. Also, their own European allies are going to shoot their missiles, because the Lord is going to put it into their mind to do this. It says, for the Most High hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of the Most High shall be fulfilled. And this is the ultimate, for the words of the Most High to be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest and is that great city. So this great whore that sits upon all these people is that great city. What great city? Which reigneth over the kings of the earth. And what nation is ruling over the kings of the earth? If you are honest with yourself, you would say America. Now they're starting to lose that sway, but this is according to prophecy, because the Lord said that for the Most High hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and to give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of the Most High shall be fulfilled. So they're going to turn against his host. So there's got to be something that has to go down for this badass bitch in the stallion in the stable to be hated and attacked. So that's what we see happening right now. So with that, I pray that your brothers have been edified. To the next time I say, Shalom.